Hey friends, welcome back to the Reasoned Reality Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Joe Smith. Today we've got with us Brian Recker. Brian and I go back a few. We met at the Post-Evangelical Collective conference several years ago and shared a pretty intense experience with other defrocked pastors and have talked multiple times since then. And if you know Brian, you what you see is what you get. And so that's what this interview is. We talk about his new book, Hellbent, why he wrote it, all of the things, but we kind of meander off into other topics as well. So it's not just the typical book interview. We kind of circle back to it at the end. But it was super encouraging. Brian's a good dude. If you're not following him already, go to the show notes. You'll also be able to find where you can order his book, which is excellent, by the way. Could not recommend it more, especially if you are working through like some hell trauma, some rapture anxiety, especially with all the stuff that's going on lately. But he does a really good job of unpacking those things, and we talk a little bit about it. I hope that you find this conversation as encouraging as I did. I always enjoy my time with Brian. So yeah, I'm going to quit blabbing. Here is my interview with Brian Recker. Well, Brian, I really appreciate you taking time of your day. We got it figured out. We missed one. I missed one. Couldn't do it, blah, blah, blah. But we're here, so it's good to see you again, man.
We made it. Thanks for having me, Joe.
We did make it.
And well, congrats on the new podcast.
Congratulations to you. Hellbent. So how does that feel? Yeah, dude. It's still good.
It feels really good. I've been, so it's been out for not even a week, actually. So tomorrow will be, so by the time people are hearing this, it'll be out for about a month probably. But as of recording, it's been out for a week. And just already getting a ton of feedback from people who have finished it. And I'm surprised how quickly people are reading it, which is I think a good sign. I tried to write it very accessibly. This is not a heavy book. I think I get into some heavy concepts, but I think I try to put it on a pretty low shelf for people to grab, and so you can move through the book pretty quickly. Literally, I got a DM from somebody yesterday who said I started it yesterday in the morning, and I just put it down. I just finished it tonight. So they read it throughout the one day, and I was like, is that normal? I mean, I'm taking it as a compliment. And yeah, hearing from people how it is impacting them and bringing a lot of, I wrote a book to try to really address a need that people feel deeply, a wound that people are carrying as well. And to help them kind of shift out of that. So hopefully like even a paradigm shift out of fear-based religion. So it's kind of a lofty goal that I had, and hearing that is connecting and people are feeling like it's really helping them take some of those steps is very encouraging.
Yeah, that's gotta feel really good, and it is. It's an important topic. I had a conversation the other day with somebody, and they were like, people ask me all the time, why are you even talking about this? Because what does it matter? And basically, it was the idea that like, well, what people believe about God informs what they believe about people, or systems, or structures. And so, like, if you believe in eternal conscious torment and that being good and loving and just, well, then how's that going to warp? Well, we can see it in our government. Like, I'm just so much.
Exactly. Totally.
Yeah. So I want to ask you, I'm
realizing more and more just how central punishment and punitiveness is to people's conception of the good. Like for some people, it's almost like goodness requires that punishment and that punitiveness towards others, which is very interesting to me, because more and more I just think that, that's not who God is. God is not a punisher, but many of us justify our punitiveness towards others because like that's who God is.
Yeah. You know what? I'll never forget. I had, even when I was back in the conservative evangelical church, I was still far more, probably liberal is not the right word, but like accepting than my friends were, or the people I worked with. And I'll never forget, I can't remember what the sermon was, but there was this woman, she's a sweet older woman, and she came up to me afterwards and we were talking about, it had something to do with queer inclusion. And she said, well, Joe, if we just love them, who's going to punish them?
That's that.
And I was just like, I was like, why does anybody have to be punished? I don't understand the question, but like in her mind, the two were connected. Like, how do I love somebody and they need to be punished. So,
well, I'll tell you what, I was raised being told from my earliest years that I deserved to be punished because of who I was as a sinner. I was born deserving of punishment according to the spiritual paradigm that I was raised with, which means everyone is baseline worthy of punishment. Anything they get nice and good, any life anything beyond hell. Honestly, we all deserve hell. That's the baseline. So anything that you're getting besides that's better than hell is like a gift of grace that you're supposed to be so thankful for. You're supposed to be so thankful that God's not just punishing you every second because that's what you deserve. That's who you are. Now that is a very twisted worldview when you think about how that causes you to treat and interact with other people. Whether I believe that the person in front of me is fundamentally deserving of love, compassion, respect, care, their basic needs met to survive, right? Like Maslow's like basic, like fundamental hierarchy of needs, like food, shelter, clothing. Like, are we deserving of that care, that baseline humanity, or are we deserving of punishment, torment? And that's the baseline. Which one of those is your baseline? Because that does in fact change how you view people in the world and how you view yourself and ultimately how you view God. And what I realize is many of us in the evangelical church received a very twisted view of humanity and what we deserved. And that fucked us up.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, it did. Well, let me ask you this. I don't want to jump in, like we were talking ahead of time. Definitely don't want to do just a typical book interview. I mean, people can go back and they can just search your name and find those. But I am curious because I think we kind of inhabit some of the same spaces. And I don't know if you feel the way that I do, but I have imposter syndrome like crazy. And I'm curious what it was like writing your very first book. And totally. I don't know. Do you struggle with that? Because if Absolutely. It's me writing the book, I'm thinking, who the hell cares what I think? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, that's no, for sure. As I wrote it, I did feel some of that. And, it's interesting. So I've gotten a lot of comparisons with, you might not be surprised, but Rob Bell's book, Love Wins, because he wrote about hell about a decade ago. And one thing I noticed, I revisited that book recently when I was writing mine and reread his. And one thing I noticed is he like just says stuff really authoritatively and confidently, and he actually doesn't cite many sources because he's writing a popular level book. I personally took a different approach. I cite a lot of different authors and point to a lot of people, but seeing him do that, first of all, it made me think, okay, I want to do this a little differently because I'm not the one authority. I do want to point people to theologians and people beyond me that have been saying these things for a long time. But second of all, I was encouraged by the fact that he did that. Even though that wasn't the tone that I wanted to strike, I was reminded, okay, you can actually just say something with your whole chest and you can believe in something and you can just say, this is the way that I see it. And like, if you want to read that from me, great. Like you're here for it. And my opinion does matter. And so I can actually just own my position. And I kind of learned that a little bit from Rob because I was thinking about, could I write something like this? I would feel overconfident. I would feel like a jackass actually, if I just said something without citing somebody else, without pointing, well, this person says, but actually me saying it. I'm like, am I allowed to do that? But when I was reading Rob's book, I wasn't thinking he was a jackass, right? He just kind of owns the fact that like my position matters and this is the way I'm seeing it. And so, like I said, while I tried to incorporate a lot more citations and like bring in other voices, I ultimately tried to also own my voice and own my position. And I realized that I was thinking things that I needed to say and I wanted to say, and I believed that they needed to be heard. And I ultimately had to just believe in that vision. And I think that's for everybody. That was a personal growth step for me to believe that the thing that I felt passionate about was something worth saying out loud. And that if other people were going to resonate with it, then they would. And if not, then the book's not for them because not everything is for everybody. And that's okay. And so that kind of helped me get over some of that imposter syndrome. I still deal with it. I mean, it's probably why I have 2 master's degrees. Like I just have to like credential myself out of it or something. But even that doesn't work. I just finished my MDiv and I still feel like I'm kind of faking it till I make it. Everybody feels that way. And I think that's one of the ways that evangelicals like keep control of the narrative is like, well, we've got like this whole industrial institution on our side, all these books, all these resources on our side. This is the baseline. We're controlling the narrative. And anybody who's defying that should have imposter syndrome because they're just making shit up. They don't know anything any better than anybody else. And what they're basing their beliefs on is not more solid and more sure than anybody else. It's just as made up. So, yeah, I don't know.
I'm so glad you said that. No. I'm so glad you said that. There were two people that spoke into that for me that changed how I viewed stuff. Tom Ord is one of them. He said, one of the big pushbacks that he gets when it comes to, omnipotence. I think is how
omnipotence. Amipotence.
Yeah,
amipotence. There it is. Yeah,
that's
a made up word.
Yes, it is a made up word about an all loving God rather than all powerful one. And the pushback is, well, you're just putting God in a box. And he just owned it. Was like, yes, I am. We all put God in a box. The question is, which box answers more questions than other boxes? Like, which box is most helpful? So that was super helpful for me. Then the other one was Pete Enns. I watched a talk that he gave once, and he said he had a picture of the Horsehead Nebula on his desk just to remind him that he really has no idea what he's talking about. Because, the picture, like his point was like the picture, he can't fathom the picture. And yet his whole job is talking about the thing that may have created that picture, right? The Horsehead Nebula. He can't understand how big that is, but he's supposed to understand what made that. And so it was just like, to me, it kind of came to the conclusion of like the idea that what I think about God, that's the most important thing about God. That's ridiculous.
For sure. Yeah, I think we have to hold everything that we say with intellectual humility, but that's not the same as feeling like an imposter, because what I believe about God matters just as much as what everybody believes about God. And I'm sharing a journey that I think will resonate with people's journeys. I'm able to share it out of a particular experience of having lived in that world, not only growing up in it, but, having a position of leadership within it. And then also doing the work of, honestly, yeah, I have 2 master's degrees from 2 evangelical seminaries. And I went to undergrad at a fundamentalist university. Like, I have been in this and studying this for a very long time. And so it's like, okay, if I can't write about this, who can? And also I just feel like there were things that I needed to say that a lot of people weren't saying very clearly, or as directly as I think they needed to be said. I think a lot of people are like content to poke some holes in hell theology and be like, yeah, maybe actually this isn't quite as punitive as we thought. Maybe God would be merciful. Hey, maybe hell is empty. There's a lot of maybes when people talk about hell. And I think the problem with that is it leaves that as the baseline. Again, like the heaven and hell assumption that this whole thing, that's still baseline. And you're just poking holes in it and kind of like saying, hey, maybe don't be afraid of it. But like, the problem, what I was seeing, and the reason I wrote the book was we didn't just need a few holes poked in it. I think we needed to really get a whole new paradigm for how to look at the point of Christianity. Because if if hell is in the picture still, then the point of Christianity is not going there. And to me, that was ruining Christianity. And so I felt like we needed to not just say, hey, maybe the Bible says some different stuff about hell, but also like, okay, let's say hell's not a part of this at all. What is this about? How can we still hold on to this if it's not about the afterlife at all? If it's about this life, what does that spirituality look like? And so that was something that I wasn't really seeing people step into as much, because it is a bit more, I think you're putting yourself on the heresy chopping block a little bit more to do it that way. But I felt like it was what needed to be said.
When did that start? When did that all start kind of like percolating in your brain? Like, maybe this is what needs to be.
So probably, but it's actually very linked to my politics. I became a socialist shortly after the first Trump election. I was very naive politically prior to 2015. I was kind of a conservative by default because I just hadn't really done the work, and I grew up in that world being told that Democrats were evil, godless, etc., and this is the way you're supposed to be. And that election really broke my brain, watching, first of all, every conservative, to include the one that I liked best at the time. This is embarrassing to admit, but my favorite one going into 2015 was Marco Rubio, and that was because I heard him say some very compassionate things about immigrants that, you know, I was like, oh, he's one of the good guys. This is better. It was that like compassionate conservatism.
Yeah, at the time he was.
Yeah, I mean, but to a point, right? Like in retrospect, and it was very helpful for me, actually. It was very instructive watching everybody ultimately bow and kiss Trump's ring, to include Rubio. After Trump, I don't know if you remember, in like a debate, he's literally mocking Rubio's dick size, and like, they literally were having a fight in a presidential debate about the size of their penises. And then literally within months, Rubio is endorsing him and groveling. And I was like, okay, I missed some stuff and I need to go back to the drawing board. Meanwhile, while that was happening, Bernie on the Democrat side was talking about universal health care, was talking about human solidarity, was talking about the fact that all workers deserve fair pay, and that this income inequality is unethical. And everything he was saying felt so clearly to me connected to what I saw in the message of Jesus, this need for human solidarity, the fact that the last will be first, and that we have to focus on these people that are being left out. And even like, why wasn't anybody else talking about universal healthcare? This seems like an obvious no-brainer. Like, if we're talking about bringing our Christianity into politics, why not start with the flourishing of bodies that we all have? Like these basic human needs being met. This is something that Christians have always cared about. And actually, in many countries, like for instance in Canada, universal healthcare was a Christian project. It was a group of socialist Christians that fought for universal healthcare and actually expanded healthcare access. That was a Christian thing. In the same way that, you know, the civil rights movement, you could see the Christian origins of it. And so while it is often Christians on the other side trying to shut down these movements for justice and equality, it is often also Christians that are fighting for those advances in justice and equality. Anyway, coming to learn some of that and going deep, I realized like I really unthinkingly just accepted what I was supposed to believe about some of this stuff. And so I did my own work, and I wouldn't say I've read everything because, you know, the Communist Manifesto is short, but the Das Kapital is very long. And, you know, I haven't read, but I got into some Marx, like I read socialist works, and I realized that historical materialism, the idea that actually this world, and often when our hope is like a pie in the sky view of spirituality, that often takes our eyes off of what's happening, the injustices in this world. And nobody loves, I like to say this, nobody loves afterlife-focused Christianity more than corrupt politicians and billionaires. They're like, absolutely, you know what? You take care of their souls for the next life. We're gonna go ahead and control their bodies in this life. You worry about the streets of gold and the pearly gates. We're gonna own all the land and exploit this earth. And we have seeded the ground of this world. Christians have, by and large, failed to have a spirituality that is concerned with the future of the planet, the future of the human species and who we become, the kinds of worlds and societies that we create and who those societies care for. That is not the focus of Christian spirituality. That is then, we're focused on the next life, and the people that are controlling that are typically oligarchs and capitalists. And I realized, that, yeah, I wanted a spirituality that was about the things that we were actually bleeding for and dying for in this world. And then I saw it all over scripture. Like, and then when you see apocalyptic language in the prophets, for instance, it sounds like they're talking about hell. They're saying the day of the Lord. You know what they're actually talking about? They're talking about cataclysmic events in history. And the stuff that kept them up at night was the same stuff that that keeps us up at night. They were worried about political upheaval, access to food and water. And this was not the stuff that I was hearing about in church. And I just realized, oh man, we have been bamboozled. But the problem was making that shift was difficult because my whole if hell was real, if you had to escape hell, then yeah, it actually makes sense to not worry that much about, the only real purpose of this life is to make sure that you don't go to hell, if something like that is real. And so I started to do a lot of digging, and that was actually in many ways inspired by some of the political changes that I was making as well. So all that was happening kind of at the same time between 2015 and 2020. Sorry, that was a long answer, but I don't know if that's helpful.
No, so good. I mean, it's so true, though. I mean, I think for so many of us, especially coming from the same places that we did, right? Because I can remember I had already started kind of my deconstruction in like 2009, 2010. Didn't have language for it then. But it was the rise of, for so many of us, it was just that blatant hypocrisy just like kind of shoved in our faces. Like, look, this is what your system is producing. And it was like, oh, it is, isn't it? Oh God, I can't be part of this. I can't be part of this anymore. And, again, what you said, it all impacts how we see people. Who said it? Our theology impacts our anthropology, or informs our anthropology, and vice versa. I don't remember who said that.
I don't know.
Yeah.
You just claim it.
I don't know who said it. Yeah. Well, there you go. I said it. But I found that to be so true, that like whatever it is that you think this God is or isn't, or afterlife is or isn't, boy, it really can impact how you see people, how you move in the world.
Totally. And yeah, I mean, when you look at Christian political priorities, very few of those things are focused on creating a more flourishing world. Very few of their political priorities are about lifting up the people that are at the bottom. I mean, even just the idea, like, they love Reaganomics, which is trickle down economics. Yeah, we're going to give the tax breaks to the billionaires because they're the ones creating the jobs. And then eventually that'll, trickle down to the rest of us. Now, first of all, that hasn't worked. But second of all, what became very clear to me is that's the exact opposite of the way that Jesus approached things. Jesus literally did trickle up economics. He said, we're going to start with the poor. And he spent his whole ministry going to the people that were left out, that were on the outskirts, the least of these, the left behind, the disinherited. And I think for some of us, we learned a Christianity where, it's really important that God didn't take sides. And so whenever somebody would say something negative about the rich, it'd be like, well, God loves them too. God loves the rich and the poor alike. And that's true. Like, all people are made in God's image. But Jesus actually does pick sides. He says, blessed are the poor and woe to you who are rich. He says the last will be first and the first will be last. There is a picking of sides, and that's precisely because all people are made in God's image and all people do have equal dignity, but we live in a world that does not reflect that reality. We live in a world that puts people in hierarchies, places some people at the top, places some people at the bottom. And so for Jesus, you can't have the beloved community as long as there's people at the bottom. One of the Eugene Debs, I don't know if you know anything about him. He's a politician that ran as a socialist back in, I want to say, like the 20s. He's one of our only socialist politicians that made it pretty far. But he has this quote where he says, like, if there's a criminal class, I am of it. If there's a working class, I'm in it. If there's a poor class, I'm a part of it. Like, basically, if there are people that are being left behind, and we're going to say that there's classes, then he's like, then I'm going to be in that. I'm going to align myself with that. And he said that as a politician, but to me, that's very much what Jesus was doing in his ministry. He was like, if we're going to leave people out, then I'm going to be with them until we bring everybody in. Because if you have, in order to have the beloved community, if you have to shut your shutters and close your blinds to the people that are suffering outside because they're not a part of it, that's not the beloved community yet. You know what that creates is it creates hell on earth. And that will come back, like, as this is what's happening in Gaza, like Israel. this amazing society. They've got a concentration camp right outside their walls. And what that now there's terrorists. We're going to call them terrorists because, like Martin Luther King said, the riots are the language of the unheard. When you stomp on a people group for a long time and then their violence, we're going to call it terrorism. Our violence, which has been perpetual towards them over the decades, that's just the status quo, baby. Now, I'm not justifying violence of any kind. I don't believe in terrorism but the reality is when you do violence to a people group over time and then they react like that, of course, that chaotic upheaval and that cycle continues throughout history. And until we decide that all people are equal and we do what Jesus said and side with the least of these, that will just continue.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question. This is gonna feel like it's coming from left field, but if you brought it up, right? Like so much of Christianity creates this problem, and then there's also this other Christianity that then fights against that problem, right? So you've got this machine over here, you've got kind of the outsiders over here, and they're both claiming the same thing. So here's something that I struggle with. I'm pretty open about this struggle. Doesn't that kind of make the case that so much of this is just made up? And like our students are going through a thing about like the Bible and whatever. And so one of the questions last night with the youth group was, what do you think about the Bible? And so they asked me, and I was like, well, I think it's complicated. I think it's complicated. So I'm just curious. This has, nothing to do with the book or any of that type of stuff.
No,
but as you were talking,
exactly
I was just like,
I want to talk about.
Yeah.
And yeah,
it just, it's like a mirror, right? Like
I don't think that's a problem. I don't have a problem with that. I think people, that is a fundamentalist way of looking at religion and the Bible. And I think that sometimes, so there's two ways to be like a fundamentalist. I think there's the rigid Christian fundamentalist who believes it's all literal. This is God's word. You have to believe every inch of it. And what that ends up becoming is a tool for oppression, typically, and enforcing rigid hierarchies. But then what often happens is you have like the Richard Dawkins types, atheists who say, well, all religion is evil, but they're defining religion the same way as the fundamentalists. So they will often say, yes, that's bad. Look at all the harm that it causes. But they're basically buying that same set of assumptions that that's what religion is. And that it is this objective truth, that it is a way of defining reality in the same way as science. Like so Dawkins will say, you don't need religion, you need science, as if those two things are in competition with each other, as if they're trying to do the same thing. So fundamentalists do view their religion as a replacement of science. In other words, the way that we explain every detail of the world, the way that we come to understand reality, it all comes from this holy text. And so fundamentalists that are atheists will say, no, science, and they put those in contrast. I don't think they're the same kind of thing. So to me, they're not in competition because they're just two very different things. Like, I mean, eating a hamburger is not in competition with going to the movies. Those are not, you know what I'm saying? Like, give me both. You know what I'm saying? In fact, they go together. That's wonderful. And for me, religion is about what matters, the why, what kind of people do we want to become? God is love, I believe. That's the culmination of scripture. And God is another way of talking about reality, of what's of first importance. And what we set our hopes on, that it is more of a verb than anything for me in some ways. It is about what we're aiming to create in this world. What kind of people and societies do we want to create? And so science can be very explanatory, but it doesn't give the heart of the thing. And so for me, like, okay, is it made up? Yeah, in a sense, sure. Like all metaphors are made up. That's where we derive meaning. We derive meaning from these symbols and metaphors that help us make sense of our lives. And I guess for me, it's like, yeah, what are we going to make up though? And is it going to make a more beautiful world or not? So yeah, I think a lot of Christians get stuck because they need it to be objectively true in the same way that a scientific fact is objectively true. And that means then that theirs is the only one that's objectively true, because ours, if it's objectively scientifically true, then it means that the other ones, the other religions, are objectively false, which means that you have to be a Christian. So part of being a Christian for many Christians means that everybody who's not a Christian is wrong and you are right because you're in the right religion. And so the other ones are made up. Ours is not made up. The other ones are made up. That is how they have to perceive all of it. But that is, again, I think, a fundamentalist way of looking at religion that is unhelpful. And I think it's actually better to recognize, like, these are beautiful metaphors to receive. What a better question for me that I point towards in my book And this is really only possible, by the way, when you deconstruct hell, because if you have like this punitive hell mindset, then yeah, it's actually really important to be the right fucking religion, because if you're the wrong one, you're going to go to hell. So you've got to be right. But once you realize this whole thing isn't about being the right religion so they don't get punished by God, for me, the point of religion is growing in love. And so I'm not worried about, am I believing the right thing? I ask, is this making me a more loving person? Am I believing something that is more loving, that is leading me into a greater degree of transformation and love? And so, yeah, make up whatever you need to make up to grow in love, I guess. But we have a beautiful tradition to receive that we can also stand in solidarity with. So I think there's a lot of beauty in Christianity, but I would never, if somebody didn't see the beauty there, and by the way, I think most of that beauty does come from specifically the life and ministry of Jesus. I think Jesus is still like the best reason to be a Christian. But yeah, if that's not for somebody, I don't need them. It's like, oh no, like they're not a Christian. Like I'm not worried about them. I'm worried about them if they are living in a state of lovelessness and separation and alienation, loneliness, and or wounding others like that. I do worry about that. And I think sometimes we get focused on all the wrong things. I don't know. Is that a helpful approach? What do you think?
It is. Well, I was thinking during like the darkest days of my deconstruction, right? Like, I mean, just the very bottom. There's a guy here in town. He was the co-lead pastor at the time, but now he's the lead pastor of Trinity United Methodist Church here in town. And this is a guy that never came from evangelicalism, never really had to deconstruct that. I mean, he went to like Duke Theological Seminary and like had real education, like the whole gamut, got it all, nothing was held back. So he was able to, like, growing up, he just had all the information, not like, so many of us were like, you had this 10% of information told to like, this is the thing. Everything outside of this is false, So he helped walk me through that. And one of the things that he pointed out to me was, he said, Joe, you're just doing the exact same thing that you're running away from. He said, you're just trying to find a better right answer. And he said, there is no right answer. And that was one of those moments for me where it was just like, oh, I'm still just operating in the same system. I'm just trying to dress it up differently. And when I recognized that, and I was able to let go of certainty, and recognize much of what you just said. The question of God, the question of so many things, just don't matter as much to me anymore. Because, let's just say, for the sake of argument, God is a metaphor. Right? Let's just say, I mean, obviously God is a metaphor, but let's just say God is a metaphor for something that we completely, like the ancients had no clue. Maybe it's the quantum field. Maybe it's this. Maybe it's that, right? And maybe at the end of the day, when we all die, it's not golden streets and singing songs and all this stuff. Maybe it's just we're absorbed back into something. I don't know. I can't let go of, like you said, the way that Jesus calls us to live life now. Like, to me, that's the one thing that I just can't let go of. I can let go of so much, to the point where, I mean, I'm not shy about this, but like I think I would consider myself more Christian agnostic. But boy, it's you said, like, if we would just order the world in the way that Jesus called us to live, things would just be so radically different. And not even in like that theocracy kind of 7 mountain mandate taking over all the, you know what I mean? But it's just like, man, it would be awesome if we had a society where people flourished, where healthcare was a basic right, where we didn't have to worry about, getting food and clean water and stuff.
Yeah, totally. I want to go back to one thing you were saying just a couple minutes ago about certainty. Well, actually, I want to just ask you, was that like really scary letting that go?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Me too.
Yes.
I think I was trained to kind of find my safety, my spiritual safety in that certainty. And I think one of the reasons I even like went as deep as I did, like becoming a pastor, getting all the degrees, like doing all the reading, is that sense of like, do I know enough to be safe? Do I have the right answers, or like, do I need to keep going and make sure I find that right answer? And I think a lot of us, that was our pursuit. And that's why we went as deep as we did into ministry, into theology. We were looking for the right answers because we were, there was a level of fear there. And I don't know that I would have perceived that as fear. It's not like I was like living in this constant state of fear, but that sense that I did need to be right. I think it was linked to the consequences that were associated with being wrong. And so when it was a really hard thing to discard, because if you're finding your safety in that, then it's like, wait a second. If I don't need to be right, if I don't need to be certain, like it felt a little I felt unmoored. I would say, do you relate to that at all? Just feeling a little bit untethered.
Yeah.
Like where's my foundation here, if not in this sort of certainty? But first of all, I guess I would encourage someone, if you're feeling that, it's normal. Second of all, I would say that certainty was never real. It wasn't intellectually honest. I was manufacturing a false certainty because I needed to be sure, because the consequences for not being sure were so high. And there was no, that certainty it's not the kind of certainty that you're looking for about what happens when you die and where you go. Like, that's not something we get. And so it is a better question to ask, what makes me more loving? And so I think it was a little scary. I think I've gotten used to that feeling. I don't feel that fear anymore. And I think part of it is learning that taking apart that certainty. I was also taking apart a punitive view of God. Part of the reason I needed that certainty was because I needed to be on the right side of God, because you didn't want to be on his bad side, Mm-hmm. But the more I think, for me, I feel safe in the love of God. And part of that means being safe in my connections with others. I believe that's where we encounter God. If God is love, God is connection, and wherever you're experiencing that connection in your own soul, with other people, in the world that God made, I think we experience God's love. And so rather than finding safety in my control of the information and my certainty, rather finding that safety in my connections and my community has been an important shift.
Mm. Speaking of, I wanted to ask you about this too, because, your dad, you've got these boys, and, you often talk about, your experience growing up. I actually thought about you, like, I'm going to talk to Brian. I'm going to ask him about this. So at the time of this recording, I think today is the new date for the rapture. I don't know. I can't keep track.
Oh
is
yeah,
today the new one?
The 7th or 8th, something like that. I think it might be
something
tomorrow.
Like that. Yeah. Because he had the wrong calendar, so that's why it didn't happen
Julian.
the other day. Yeah. But I thought about you when we were going to have this conversation, because my son, he's 16. And he was like, "What's the rapture?" And I was just like, "Boom, that's a parenting win,"
Right.
And so I'm curious, not to dwell on the book too long or whatever, but you're writing this book and all of these things, and I think I do remember you talking about that in a post about your boys not knowing something that you grew up with. And but I just love that idea. I love that you said that, and I'm curious, as you were kind of writing or thinking through these things, I don't know, man. It feels good to know that your kids aren't going to have that same anxiety, right? Like,
totally, dude. Yeah, it's weird. I can't relate to them at one level. It's like they don't know anything about hell. They do. They know about it. They think it's funny. They were making jokes in the back of the car the other day. They were like, I don't know, kids like love morbid humor, and they were like talking about like, what if this happened to you and this happened to you? And they were like listing all these like horrible things that can happen to you. And then like, and then you go to hell, ha! And they were just like laughing about like the idea of going to hell.
Like, hey, that's not funny. You haven't earned the right.
No, I was like, laugh it up. It is actually ridiculous. It's very funny. But they don't have that same idea about who God is. And I'm sure I'm messing them up in all kinds of other ways that I'll discover later down the road. We like shift and we make sure we don't give our kids our trauma. So we give them new exciting traumas.
Oh, yeah.
But I haven't pushed on them to be religious. I think if they're interested in that, I do take them to church because they're young and I want to go to church. And so they kind of have to go with me and they don't really want to go. And so at some point when they're just a little bit older and they're able to stay home alone, they can. I'm not going to force that on them. But does part of me hope that they might choose a spiritual path like that? A little bit, but most of that has to do with the fact that, it's something that I'm into and it's always fun to have shared interests. But I'm more worried about the kind of people they're becoming. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I'm paying attention to. And I don't know, you can just call it different names, at the end of the day, and you probably know this, you're one of your co-hosts is Jen would call herself an atheist, right?
I think she's spiritual. I think that's how she labels herself as like, she's spiritual. I don't know that she is atheist. Yeah.
And I typically find that the God that they don't believe in is the God that I don't believe in too. And
for sure.
What they're talking about as, human rights or, what they might call it different things, but I see God in those things. And for them, they don't need that concept. And that's fine. It's not the kind of concept that, I think we should force on people. I had a good conversation with Savannah Sereno recently. She's Instagram sort of content creator who talks about her atheism. She used to be a pastor, has an MDiv, and is now an atheist. And she said, I really loved it. She was just like, I realized that when I thought about the idea of there not being a God, and it just gave me so much more peace than the idea of being a God. And it was like a relief. And I was like, well, that's awesome. Like that's not how I had felt. For me, I still see value in the concept, and ultimately, I just can't shake that belief. And I don't feel it's not like a self-righteous thing. I don't think it makes me better than somebody else who doesn't believe in that. I think that there are atheists who are terrible people, and there are atheists who are wonderful people, and there are Christians who are terrible people, and there are Christians who are wonderful people. And I don't think that that's typically not the determining factor.
Ain't that the truth? Yeah. No, Jen and I have had many conversations, and even Luke. Luke is, the creator of the account, and he came from the same kind of world that we did. And he completely deconverted out. He's atheist now, but not, like you said, he's not one of those fundamentalist kind of people, so he doesn't operate in that framework. And I can remember if you had said that to me like 20 years ago, holy crap, that would have brought up all kinds of stuff. But like now, like you say that, and I'm just like, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes total sense. Why would I? It's all, like you said earlier, it's all our best guess anyway. Why would I throw a fit about it?
I think we have to make meaning the way that makes sense to us. And, I don't know what it's like to be in anybody else's body or brain. I know that I have had particular experiences that make more sense with the idea of God, but I don't think of God as like a big guy. I think that taking apart the idea of God as a sort of an authoritarian ruler, a patriarchal authoritarian dictator in the sky, and I don't know that most Christians would necessarily own that description, but I think if you dial down into how they actually, their mental model of God, I think that that's pretty close. And so actually, interestingly enough, for a couple of years there in my deconstruction, I was more comfortable with less personal, more impersonal metaphors for God. Paul Tillich talks about like God is the ground of being. And Father is the metaphor that Jesus uses the most. And that one I was having a hard time with because of the patriarchal authoritarian undertones of that metaphor. And it was easier for me to see God in more impersonal ways as more of a force for a little while. And I think part of that was just because of the ways that this sort of personal God, who was a guy who he knew the plans he had for me, which sounds nice, except if he also was very angry at me for a lot of reasons. And, he was pretty temperamental in a lot of different ways. And you don't really know which God you're getting. Which side of the bed is this God going to wake up on? The do a genocide side of the bed, or the I'm going to send my son in love to die for you. Although I'm also going to punish him in your play. Like this is so some of those pictures of God were quite challenging for me. And as a result, I felt more comfortable in prayer, not so much to like a guy, like dear Father, talking to a guy, but more like doing breath prayers where I was more connecting with myself. And that for a few years was like a safer way for me to do spirituality that felt more just right. But interestingly, I would say that I think I'm regaining some of the personal, because I do think that God is supra personal. I think that the idea of father's a metaphor. Okay. Like there's no genitals involved. Like it's a metaphor, but I think it can be a powerful one because I think that we are relational people, and that I think that relationship and connection is the meaning. Like I don't, know what life is about. The meaning of life, I think it's love and connection. That for me, the meaning of life is love and connection, or I'm not sure what it means. And so for me, that's what God is. God is love. God is connection itself. I like to say, Richard Rohr says God is reality, another name for reality with a personality. And I like that definition, but then I take it like one step further and say like God is the loving and connected nature of reality. And so that's kind of how I think about God now, which feels a little impersonal, but the only way to relate to love is personally. And so I think that there is power in having a personal relationship with love. But that's not something that I push on people. Like, unless you're in this relationship, you're going to be eternally fucked. But here's what I will say. A lot of these concepts, you reclaim them pretty quickly, because actually I do think that being disconnected from love is hell. I do think that unless you are connected to love, that you're fucking yourself over, right? Because if love is about love and connection, then when we isolate ourselves and we're refusing to connect with our brothers and sisters, we're dehumanizing them. We're not seeing them as our fellow image bearers. We're not seeing the divine in our neighbors. I believe that we are cutting ourselves off from what we were created to thrive in, which is love. So all that to say, it's been an interesting journey of like having to take pause on certain concepts and then even reclaiming some of those concepts on the other side of deconstructing some of the punitive elements and that sort of thing.
As you were talking, I thought back, I can't remember who I was reading recently, but they were talking about this idea of, Jesus not showing up to create another religion. And they point to a couple of places. Maybe it was Keith Giles who was talking about this. Maybe I was talking to him. It doesn't matter. But he was saying things like, don't let anyone call you father. Don't let anyone call you teacher. When he appears to Mary after, Mary Magdalene afterwards, he says, don't cling to me. Don't cling to me. Basically saying, it's better for me to go. Like, I have to go. If I stay, whatever. And so the idea that Jesus didn't come to start a religion, but show us a way to live, like you said, in connection and love and all those things. And I wonder, with the doctrine like Hellbent, man, that's a perfect example of how we're seeing these things now in the United States. It's, behind the scenes for decades. It's rearing its ugly head, and then things becoming twisted, into these spectacles, right? Where you have like what should have been a funeral or should have been a celebration of life turns into a political rally, where churches build their identities on fear and being persecuted, even though they're coming from the positions of great power. And all of that wrapped up in this framework of religion, which I think Jesus was opposed to. And I'm curious from your perspective, going through this book, and like you said, you're untangling all of these things, but man, we're seeing the devastation of those beliefs like played out in real time in our government, in this, Christo-fascism, this Christian national, whatever phrase you want to use, that's just taking over the country. I'm curious how you saw when you were writing. Did you have that in mind? Did it start to play out as you were writing through it? Like, oh my God, dude, this right here is the reason that XYZ. Does that make sense what I'm trying to say?
Yes. Yeah. So I didn't write a political book, but I definitely can't help but get quite political because I do think these things have been intertwined. And so I wrote the book prior to Trump's second term. I wrote it, I guess at the beginning of 2024. And then that election was that fall. And so I had the opportunity to do edits, and I did write another couple paragraphs to kind of refer to what was happening, because it did feel like we were entering a new epoch in some ways. And I didn't want my book to feel super outdated, because it does feel like we're in a whole nother world from a year ago, in many ways. But it is, Christians have always used fear-based religion. Well, actually, here's even more than Christians using it. I think in many ways, the governments and really any powerful people, fear-based religion is a great tool for the oppressor. It is. Marx, I actually reference in my book Marx's favorite, or that famous expression that religion is the opiate of the masses, in other words, it's kind of numbs people to their material conditions, causing them to put their hope in this thing beyond reality, beyond space and time, in the next life, as opposed to fighting for a change and a revolution in their material conditions. And one of the best ways you can do that is say, oh no, you're miserable now, but heaven, right? Or actually no, your main mission right now should not be to, cure the problem of global child hunger. Your main mission should be converting people for hell, so that they don't go to hell. And so that is a way to really redirect away from these material priorities. And so I make the point that, if evangelicals, if that's their goal, then they in fact are operating as the opiate of the masses. But I don't think that's what Jesus's religion was. I don't think that's what spirituality has to be. I think spirituality can be liberatory, that it can be revolutionary. But we have often settled for something that is, that actually keeps us quite chained, and I think also keeps us very easily manipulated. I think evangelicals are so easily manipulated by the powers. And we saw that at that rally that you mentioned. They were so happy that they got the opportunity to do an altar call before the lead-in to a white nationalist political rally. And afterwards, a ton of them were gloating online, saying there has never been a bigger gospel opportunity in the history of the United States. This is the biggest gospel opportunity we've ever had. The gospel was preached to millions, tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of people. And I would simply submit that if it can sit comfortably alongside white nationalism, maybe it's not the gospel. Maybe we've missed it. Maybe that altar call, which was about, hey, believe in this thing. Hey, come, raise your hand or stand up and put your faith in Jesus. But for them, that faith in Jesus means assenting to particular doctrines so that you can check that box and be a Christian so you can go to heaven when you die. And then, now that that box is checked, let's move on to bigger and better things. White nationalism. And that they'll take that trade every time. The evangelicals are happy to have prominence and power so that they can push their message that is about disembodied souls, while they overlook the real harm that is happening to embodied people. And so, I do think that is closely tied to what I'm deconstructing, because when we have a spirituality that is not about bodies and harm, but instead about the afterlife, we're going to have no real motivation to do the kinds of things that Jesus did and to build the kingdom of God.
Let me ask you a question. This just popped into my head while you were talking. So yes, I agree. I mean, obviously I agree. And how do I say this? If that's the case, right, you have this thing that produces these two different things, right? You and the maybe the stream of thought that you're representing in this conversation. And then the ones that you just mentioned and them representing the streams of thought in this their streams of thought in this conversation. Do you think those streams of thought would change if the religion itself was no longer part of the equation? Just take God out of the equation. So my question is God the causation, or is it just correlation? Do you know what I mean? Is Christianity the reason we're in where we're in, or is this just people? This is just who we are as a species, and we can take one of two roads, and we're going to use whatever framework we've got available to us to accomplish these two different things.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, it is interesting when you look at fundamentalist religions, they almost always have like the same hallmarks. Whether it's Mormonism or fundamentalist Christianity or fundamentalist Islam, almost always you have you have patriarchal authoritarian hierarchies that subjugate women. That's just across the board.
Yeah.
They all do that.
Yep.
And they all use fear-based sort of language to really instill fear about the afterlife so that people don't question the framework. They all do that. And so once you kind of see that pattern, it becomes very obvious that like they're all kind of doing the same thing, I think. And then you kind of start to realize, oh, like that's what it's for. Like it's not just that like, oh, religion sometimes creates the subjugation of women. I think that, yeah, you might go a little further and say, oh, the reason like religion is such a useful tool for these societies is that it allows them to continue a patriarchal system that subjugates women. That's like what that's like why they're doing it, you know, that it's like a mechanism for continuing that dominance. So yeah, I don't know, chicken over that egg. I think it's a really helpful tool in the hands of empire. It always has been, I think, fear-based, high control, patriarchal religion has always been a helpful tool for empire too. And yeah, unfortunately, Christendom really stepped right into it. I don't think Christianity started out that way. I do think that it was quite a radical movement from the margins when it began. It was a critique to empire, and it was giving voice to the poor. And as soon, the switch of Christendom is that instead of being a voice for the poor, it became another mouthpiece for the empire over time. And even like when I look at the creeds, and I'm happy if I'm in a church, I recite the creeds, but I'm not like, they're not like, I don't care that much about them. And here's why. That came about after imperial religion really stepped in. Constantine became a Christian, and he put the cross on his war shields, and he went and conquered in the name of Jesus. Like that was like his first thing that he did. And the Christians were like, hey, like we've got some cultural power, and some good did come out of that. I think that actually the world, the Roman Empire became a more compassionate place towards the poor because of the Christian influence in the Roman Empire. That is true. But what also happened was that imperial thought got into Christianity. And one of the ways it did that was in the creeds, they said, okay, here's the rigid black and white rules. It used to be a debate about the nature of Christ. What does it mean that Jesus is God? There were a bunch of positions, and they were very open-ended. But then at the Nicene Council, they're like, nope, this is the rigid position that we must all hold. And if you hold one of those other positions, we're going to kill you. And I personally don't think that violence breeds a spirit of intellectual curiosity and honesty. That's not the fruit of, I think, the kind of religion Jesus was giving us. But that's what empires love, is that black and white rigidity. And so, yeah, that has been the majority of the history of Christianity has existed under Christendom, and therefore it has been saddled with the influence of empire. And so it has been a tool for that. I don't think it has to be that. And so I think there's always been a fight to reclaim that original radical spirit, whether it's the Anabaptists, or liberation theologians who have been fighting for that in more recent years. And so, we see that always happening. But yeah, does that spirit come from that? I think there is something in us that longs for the transcendent, and that is kind of across cultures. And it is an interesting phenomenon how that transcendent idea can often be used for domination or for liberation. So yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm not smart enough to go beyond that, just describing what I've seen. I'm not sure what. Yeah, if you took God out of the equation, would we still have that same ancient battle between oppression and liberation? Probably so.
Probably. Yeah, no, I think so. I think it's just sometimes the vehicle that they use, right? I mean, we're humans, so we're going to do what we do. Well, I want to honor your time. So I want to kind of land the plane just a little bit. So I want to ask you a question about your book again. However, I think I want to approach it slightly different because we touched on it just a second ago, our kids. You and I are both dads. And we're raising, I had my oldest, she's 23, my youngest is 16. And I want and you brought it up, like I want my kids to be good people, above all things, I want them to be compassionate and kind. All the fruits of the Spirit, right? Like all of those things that are named, those are good things regardless, right? Like that's what I want for my kids. When you were writing your book, did it ever cross your mind that your boys one day might pick this up? They might read this. And I'm curious, if it did, what do you hope that they walk away with?
Yeah, I do hope that they would. I don't know that they'll ever feel like a great need to. I do think that this book, I think it casts a compelling vision of what it could mean to be a Christian today and what it could mean to try to seek after the way of Jesus. That would be compelling for someone who even didn't grow up in fear-based religion and receive a lot of hell trauma. I do think that's my primary person that I wrote it for, was somebody who is really wrestling with the idea of, does God punish people? Is that what this is about? And breaking free from that and discovering the new paradigm. But I think that I've actually heard from people who are atheists who have read it and who were surprised by how much they really enjoyed it. So I do think my boys would get something out of it. I did write it with them in mind in many ways, but not because I thought they would read it, but because I want to create a world where they don't feel that fear, there in my dedication, my dedication at the beginning of the book is, well, I'll just read it actually, because I don't want to mess it up. I think I had it by heart, but it's for my children, for my own inner child, and for the children still squirming anxiously in the pews. And so in many ways I wrote it for my own inner child, but I see me in them in many ways, and I want something different for them than what I got. And so in many ways, writing it for them is writing it for me, and writing it for me is writing it for them. I hope that they experience unconditional belovedness. I mean, that's ultimately, I believe that, I talked about earlier that there's this fundamental assumption, like whether people deserve punishment or just deserve love and compassion. And we really messed up the gospel, man. Like, we made the gospel the good news. We said the good news was that by default, you deserve the punishment of hell. And anything you get better than that is grace. That's what grace is. Grace was defined as getting what you don't deserve, which is hell. And I still believe in grace. I think that one of the reasons I'm a Christian is this message of grace. But grace means something different to me than anything beyond punishment. For me, grace is unmerited favor. In other words, it was unearned, not because we deserve hell, but because simply by virtue of your existence, you deserve love. That is the message of grace, that you don't have to do anything to be loved. You don't have to earn love. You are born beloved and worthy of love because you are a child of God. That is grace. And that is what I hope for my children, regardless of if they call themselves Christians or not. I want them to know down in their bones that they are loved, not in spite of who they are, not because they're actually worthy of a shit sandwich and they actually suck and they're terrible people, but, maybe somebody could find it in their hearts to love them anyway. No, I want them to know in their bones that they are loved because they are deeply worthy of love. And so is everybody else.
Can you imagine what our world would be like? Yeah. Can you imagine how different our world would be if that had been the message? If what you just said had been the message? I mean, think about it. If you've got these Christians coming over to the Americas and they meet these indigenous people and they met them with that spirit.
Yeah.
How would our country be changed today? Fundamentally changed.
I think that the Christian church probably will never be what God wants it to be until it deeply grieves the way that it has encountered these other traditions in the world and makes repairing for that their central purpose. We lost so much of our own souls for our posture towards people of other faiths and traditions, but also what could have been gained if we would have instead leaned in and said, okay, we think we might have some things to offer, but you know what? We believe that you're children of God, which means you also have something to offer. So like, let's learn from each other and enter into these relationships of mutuality. We could have learned about the way that they treat the earth as sacred, and maybe we wouldn't be exploiting it like the way that we are.
That'll preach, Ryan. That'll preach, man.
You know, I grieve the way that I was taught to think about other people from other faiths, that I was told that, you know, Buddhists were unsaved, that, you know, indigenous spirituality is pagan and demonic, that all of this is damnable. And that is such a dark perspective on image bearers of God who just came up in a different part of the world than you, and who might also have seen some things that we haven't seen. And that was never Jesus's perspective. He was never like, oh, you're from a different background, then hold on, let me give you the statement of faith that you need because yours is all messed up and you're going to hell. Actually, typically when he met people from other cultural backgrounds like the Roman centurion, he ended up walking away from that saying like, that person had more faith than many of the people from my own religion. And that faith is based on the fact that that person was able to step outside of their cultural boundaries and see in Jesus somebody who's outside of their culture, somebody worth listening to. And that's the spirit that we're meant to move in.
You know, I've heard that story a million times. I don't know that I've ever thought about it just the way that you said
well,
that.
let me blow your brain a little. I unpacked this in my book, this exact story. This is a really important story. The Roman centurion comes to Jesus and he's like, heal my servant. And Jesus is like, I've never seen such faith in Israel. And my evangelical interpretation growing up was, oh, his faith was because he believed that Jesus was the Son of God and the Messiah. It's like, what are you talking about? That's not in the passage at all. This is a man looking for help, but he came to someone that was really off the grid for him. And the best way to think about it is this Roman centurion was a man with cultural power. He was a colonizer. He was a man of the empire. And Jesus was a homeless, wandering Jewish mystic. The equivalent would be, think about this. This is in the book. I say, like, imagine a Marine colonel in Afghanistan seeks out an Islamic sage for spiritual direction. Despite the fact that he's coming with all this cultural power, and he's like, man, I think we're missing it. I think my people don't have the answers. I think I need to maybe submit myself and receive some answers from somebody. And that's maybe would be a great thing to do, but it's pretty hard to imagine it happening. Why? Xenophobia. The boundaries that we place on who counts as worth listening to, cultural superiority, we simply don't do that. And that is that's the dynamic. I mean, if anybody would have looked down on someone like Jesus, it would have been a Roman centurion. And instead he comes and he asks him for help. And then Jesus says, many will come from the east and the west, and we're going to feast together. And sons of the kingdom will be left out. And what he was calling out was this nationalism, this inability to see the face of God in the cultural other. And Jesus told a lot of stories like that, like the Good Samaritan being chief among them. But yeah, for me, salvation is happening right now. It's not about the afterlife. It's about the kind of world that we're building. And part of what keeps us in hell is refusing to see God in everyone.
I love it. That's a good place to land. I want to honor your time. You've given us a ton of time. We could keep talking. I mean, we could keep talking because I got more stuff, but, Brian Recker, just really appreciate it. Yes. Go to the show notes, click the links. You can buy it from there, and go follow him if you're not following Brian already. Dude, anytime, it's so funny. I'll cut this out if this is embarrassing, but every time, you collab with me on something, dude, the comments, you get more comments from people that are just like, hey, Brian, look at me, Brian, over here, Brian, please, over here, comment on mine. I'm just like, you have this.
In a good way?
This aura.
They like me?
No, in a good way. No, well, that too. I mean, we all catch that, but you have like this aura, to use the vernacular of the kids, and so many are just like, I don't know. I
hope it results in book sales. That's all I'll say about that.
Yes, whatever works, right?
No, man, I try not to cultivate a celebrity thing. I mean, listen, like, I know you don't. Instagram. That's not like a real thing. It's very fake, actually. Like, I'm not a big shot.
No. I know you're not. You're not. Yeah.
But I will say
it is funny how it works, though.
Totally. Well, I think what I will simply say, and there's who knows where some of that could be coming from, but I will say that I try to show up very vulnerably and very authentically, and I don't feel the need to censor myself, and I think that is attractive. And in a spiritual, unfortunately, when I was a pastor, that was not the case, and I don't think that's the case for many pastors. I do think that most pastors feel a certain pressure to have a very curated image, and also are quite censored in what they're allowed to say. And I think that's really unfortunate, because I think that true spirituality it is found in authenticity. I'm tired of that. I have no patience with that, and so I have no reason to do that anymore. And so I'm going to show up as my full self. And if you call it aura, then I'll take it.
Oh man, yeah, I always have such a good time talking with you. I really appreciate it. Brian, thank you for your work. Thank you for putting the book together. Thank you for being you. Thank you for being one of the voices that are helping lead to a healthier way. If you're listening, go follow him and do all the things, because we were talking ahead of time about how difficult this work can be because it's outside the machinery. Right. And so all the little things help. So even just like sharing, liking, whatever, all of it helps. So go click those links and go follow Brian. Dude, it was so good. Really, really appreciate your time, man.
We'll do it again sometime, Joe.
Absolutely.
Appreciate you, buddy.
All right, everybody. Yeah, man. All right, y'all get out of here. I hope that wherever you find yourself today, that you're having the exact day you need. Make sure that you are following Reasoned Reality on all of the platforms. You can go to the show notes to make sure that you're doing that. Don't forget, you may be the only voice of reason that someone hears today. So don't be afraid to use it. We'll see you next time.